I came across a quote this week when I was reading doing a little research on our text, and I wanted to share it with you all as I started my reflection today. And that is that some have called Jesus a court jester in the halls of power, a playful, mischievous satirist with a twinkle in his eye, a trickster rhetorically tying his opponents in knots. I kind of like that image. Jesus as a court jester in the halls of power. And he's about to do it again. Here, as we often find in the Gospel of Luke, Jesus is eating with people. He never goes hungry here. This time, it's at the high-ticket invitation of society's religious leaders. And it's not the first time that he's accepted one of these probably coveted invitations to be at this particular table. Earlier in the gospel, when he's eating with different religious leaders and lawyers and community leaders, he allows a woman to wash and anoint his feet. Very scandalous. And then he dared to forgive her for her sins right there at the table. Can you imagine? And another time, he was accused himself of not washing properly by the host and the other guests. And he did not mince words in his response. He spoke so directly that the leaders began to plot against him. So what will happen this time? What lesson does Jesus have up his sleeve? Because I have to imagine he's not going to just, as we heard, go there and sit quietly. At first glance, we might read this or hear this story and think that it looks like a lesson in dinner party etiquette. Where to sit, whom to invite, how to behave. But with Jesus, as I hope we all might know by now, things are never that simple, especially when he uses parables like he does today. Now, in Jesus' day, banquets weren't set at round tables, like many of our banquets and wedding celebrations and fundraisers and galas are today. They were arranged in a U shape, maybe a little angular U shape. And the host sat at the center of that table, at the center of that U. And then the closer you sat to the host, the higher you were in your honor. So people definitely noticed who got the best seat and who got stuck at the very, 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 very far end of this U here. Now you can imagine that when Luke said that the guests were choosing their places of honor, that the room was probably buzzing with murmurs. Everybody walks in. Who's going to sit where? Robes are rustling. People are trying to angle themselves closer or squeeze in where there might be a little spot for them to sit. Some are leaning forward so that they can hear better. Some are maybe shifting down a cushion or two. Some are pretending to step aside. They don't need to fight or be part of all of this, all of these efforts to sit closer to the host. But they're still watching carefully, maybe in false humility, for their chance to squeeze in and plop down right where they want to be. And we know these tables, don't we? Right? I see some heads nodding, yes. Robert is shaking his head a lot back there. The boardroom tables where decisions are made, the lunchroom tables, middle schools where kids learn quickly who's in and who's out, the tables in the halls of Congress where power gets traded like currency. Even our own tables, church committees, neighborhood gatherings, family dinners. I still sit at the kids' table. I think I might have graduated up to the adult table finally 2 Thanksgivings ago. But these can be places where we measure and where we compare. Who's closest to the influence? Who's left out at the edge? Who is here who really shouldn't be here? People are still fighting for the best seats, still pushing, still elbowing, still politicking, still cheating their way to the top spot. And once they've got it, they just grip onto that chair so tightly that they squeeze the life out of everything and everyone that they are supposedly there to help, to serve, or even just coexist with, have a conversation with. Why? Why do we do this to each other? Why are our tables like this? I wonder if it's because we've built a society and an economy on the belief that if someone else wins, if someone else succeeds, if something good happens to someone else, that means someone else has to lose. We've set a table where worth is measured in social status and Instagram followers or views on TikTok and wealth and productivity. A table where dignity is sadly reserved for just a few. But at God's dinner party, the table looks different. We're not scrambling for a seat because God has already built a longer table and will keep building. So it's as long as it needs to be, one where every seat is honored, one where every worker is celebrated, and justice is the shared labor of all of us. And that's why today, on this Labor Day weekend, that observing Labor Sunday matters. Because this vision isn't just about dinner parties 2,000 years ago. It's about the tables that we are setting and that we are sitting at right now. Think back just 5 years ago to the pandemic. I was trying to remember this phrase a couple of days ago, and it took me a little while for it to come back to the top of my brain, which is embarrassing. Because it was a buzz phrase all throughout the pandemic, or at least for part of it. Do you remember how much we lifted up essential workers? That's the word I couldn't remember, essential workers. Grocery clerks, delivery drivers, nurses, janitors, teachers, people whose labor is often overlooked, underpaid, and underappreciated. But for a few months, they were praised as heroes. People lobbied for them to get raises. People went out on the streets and clapped pots and pans together in celebration and gratitude for the work that they were doing. They got the respect that they always deserve, supplies that they needed, even sick days that they weren't able to always take. But not the pay, not the protections. And now, 5 years later, much of that recognition has faded. And we've slipped back into normal times. And normal still means an economy where someone like Jeff Bezos can earn more in 30 seconds than most Amazon employees make in an entire year. Normal still means watching nurses and teachers scramble for housing as housing prices soar, and while their salaries might stay the same or minimally increase, that increase doesn't cover the jump in the cost of rent. Normal still means social status and wealth are markers of worth, while the labor of caregiving and service and survival are overlooked and often ignored, except for that one appreciation day. Now, by this point in Luke's gospel, we're going to take it back to the text here. Jesus had a habit of breaking Sabbath in all the best ways. Healing when he shouldn't, eating when he shouldn't, turning a day of rest into a day of justice when many would say that he shouldn't. And this dinner party that was happening, remember, on the Sabbath, it was a Sabbath meal with the religious elite. This was no different. Jesus was doing it again. But maybe they weren't quite aware of it. You see, he was disrupting their carefully ordered seating chart, their assumptions about who deserves honor, their comfortable distance from the people they didn't want at their meal, the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind. This parable is Sabbath breaking. Not the rules about rest, but the rules about who gets to rest, who gets honored, who gets invited to the table, who gets an invitation to the party. And you could say, and many have argued, that Sabbath has always been God's labor law. 6 days you shall work, but the seventh is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. It wasn't just for the wealthy or the privileged. Sabbath was and is a gift for everyone. Landowners and laborers, foreigners and families, even animals and the very earth itself. It's a radical command that says your worth isn't measured by your productivity, but by your very existence, your humanity, who God has created you to be. Now, generations later, labor movements have carried that same spirit forward. They fought to break the bonds of industrial slavery. They insisted that workers, including children, were not expendable, but were human. And out of those struggles came many things that we take for granted. The 40-hour work week, the weekend, the right to rest. And those struggles are still happening because many people do not receive those things now. Many people in our community, as you know, are working 2 to 3 jobs just to pay their rent, just to put food on their table. They're working 50, 60, 70, 80-hour work weeks to take care of their families. So when we gather on Labor Day weekend, we're not just remembering history or giving thanks for a day off, although we do give thanks for a day off. We are reclaiming Jesus' vision that our value is not in what we produce, but in who we are, and that the table is long enough for every worker to sit, to rest, and to be honored. And that's why today it's not just enough for us to talk about workers or to reflect on this call for justice. The call of the gospel is for us to listen to those whose labor holds our communities together, often without the dignity or the protections or the wages that they deserve. So today we will be hearing directly from one of those voices. And I am so very grateful that Carrie Ann has arranged for Joseph Augusto to be here today. He is an Uber and a Lyft driver and an organizer with the California Gig Workers Union. And his presence and his story, I know, will remind us that the scramble for seats at the table isn't just an ancient parable, but it's something that's happening right here in our community on the peninsula today. So Joseph, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Good morning, brothers and sisters. Good morning, church. How are you guys all doing today? My name is Joseph Augusto. I am a rideshare driver. I've been driving for about 10 years in the San Francisco Bay Area. I am also a driver leader in SIU's California Gig Workers Union. The fight to unionize rideshare drivers in California started almost a decade ago, and I've been in the fight for about 5 years. Our campaign isn't just to win better pay or safer working conditions, but to challenge a business model that has stripped workers of rights, isolated them, and tried to call it innovation. The companies we're up against, Uber and Lyft, have built a system designed to keep workers from organizing. A group of workers who are always on the move, don't have a boss to point to, don't always have a space they can meet, and don't have a schedule. Uber and Lyft use technology to make exploitation look like flexibility. And they do everything they can to try to turn back the clock on basic workers' rights and protections. Driving for Uber and Lyft and other app-based platforms is highly precarious work. Drivers face income instability, algorithmic control, and deactivation with little or no recourse to challenge their loss of livelihood. According to the UC Berkeley Labor Center study, the median earnings of a California gig worker amounts to just $5.97 per hour, well below state and federal minimum wage, after accounting for expenses and taxes. And that's why we're fighting. The stakes are high. Yes, this is about drivers, but it is also a fight that will shape the future of the labor movement. Gig corporations spent a record-breaking $200 million to pass Proposition 22 in California in 2020, which denies gig workers a living wage and basic rights afforded to other California workers, like paid sick leave, overtime, workman's compensation, and other protections. At the time, it was the most expensive ballot measure in U.S. history. Uber and Lyft and other gig corporations sold voters and gig drivers empty promises with Proposition 22. In their ads, they said Proposition 22 would guarantee gig workers at least 120% of the minimum wage, but we're not making nearly that. In reality, we're working longer and longer hours just to break even, while gig corporations rake in billions of dollars. We worked to strike down Proposition 22, bringing the fight all the way to the Supreme Court, California Supreme Court. Unfortunately, Proposition 22 is still law, but we were able to chip away at one provision: the ballot measure's ability to limit our right to collectively bargain. And so in April, we launched legislation that gives all rideshare drivers in California the right to form our union, and we are in a critical moment. Gig workers in Massachusetts passed a similar law last year to win collective bargaining rights. This law that we have in California that's proposed, AB 1340, will give drivers the right to collectively bargain for higher wages. There are some 800,000 drivers across California. 1 in 24 Californians do rideshare. AB 1340 will be the most significant expansion of collective bargaining rights in California history. After months of lobbying, mobilizing drivers to voice their support, the governor announced support on Friday. We are going to make this happen because of the strength of and the power of working people. And so, on the eve of Labor Day, I want to let you know I am honored to share my story and the fight of so many workers with all of you today. Thank you to Carrie Ann Steele for inviting me to join you and your congregation for listening today. We know our fight hasn't been easy and there is much work ahead. These companies have billions of dollars and have every incentive to keep things the way they are. But today I feel really happy to celebrate how far we've come. We are stronger together. Together we have purpose. And we have a shared commitment of making sure that no one who works full time is treated like they're disposable. Thank you so much.